Bigfoot, a 50-year journey come full circle by Dr. Matthew A. Johnson. This is chapter 7 called Come One, Come All. I'm Willi Rose. During the remainder of the summer of 2000, we continued with repeated expedition trips to Mount Elijah and the Bigelow Lakes area. We found additional evidence and had a couple more visuals. I decided that it would be a good idea to report our research results to the nearby park rangers. After all, they were very kind to my family and me, and I thought they would appreciate it if I kept them up to speed. I dropped by the Oregon Caves National Monument Park and gave Ranger John Roth an update. He pulled out a map and asked me to point out where we were finding our evidence and what road we were using to access the area. I was more than happy to accommodate his request. The following weekend, a couple of guys accompanied me back up to our research area outside of the boundaries of the Oregon Caves National Monument Park. We turned off one of the main logging roads onto the spur road that took us to our spot. Halfway up the spur road, we came to a sudden stop. We couldn't go any further. It appeared that someone took a rather large backhoe and dug up the spur road to make it impassable. They succeeded. There was absolutely no way that we were going to get my Suburban past the newly created crater in the middle of the road. There was only room enough to pass by if you were riding a horse, four-wheeler, dirt bike, or were walking on foot. We were shocked, angered, frustrated, and yet very curious as to who did it and why they did it. We got back into the Suburban and drove back to the main logging road. We drove up and down a few other spur roads in the nearby area, and none of them had been dug up. We drove back to the spur road that led to our research area and stopped once again at the newly dug up crater in the road. I parked the Suburban and we exited the vehicle. We decided to walk the remaining 2 miles in order to check out our research area. We finally reached our destination area. We walked off the road and through the trees in order to reach the meadows near the Bigelow Lakes area. From a distance, I could see what appeared to be a puppy pen in the middle of the meadow. I walked through the tall grass, and as I got closer to the puppy pen, I saw something inside of it resting on the ground. When I reached the puppy pen, I realized that what I was seeing was a rabbit. We looked at one another with puzzled expressions on our faces. Then one of the guys noticed a video camera on one of the trees, which was pointed directly at the puppy pen. Then we noticed another video camera on a different tree, which was on the other side of the meadow and was also pointed at the puppy pen. We managed to put one and one together as we quickly assessed the area, including the newly formed crater in the spur road created by a backhoe. It became very clear to us rather quickly that the spur road had been dug up to prevent us from reaching our research area. Also, whoever dug up the road wasn't just interested in preventing us from reaching our research area. They were also very interested in commandeering our research area. Thus, the puppy pen, rabbit, and video cameras. I was no longer a big fan of the park rangers at the Oregon Caves National Monument Park. I regretted the day that I told Ranger John Roth anything about the evidence that we were finding in the area near the park boundaries. I was fuming by now. I reached over the top of the 4-foot-high puppy pen fence, grabbed the rabbit by the scruff of the neck, and released him into the wild. Then I walked over to one of the video cameras, which was mounted on a tree pointing at the puppy pen, gave the video camera the bird, said a few choice words that would have been bleeped out on TV, and walked away. I didn't know what we were going to do now regarding our Bigfoot research efforts, but I knew it wasn't going to happen in this area any longer. The Oregon Caves National Monument Park staff made sure of that. As we were walking the 2 miles back to the spur road to my parked Suburban, Dr. York saw that I was discouraged and said, "Cheer up, old chap. There's plenty of mountains to go about looking for our big hairy friends. This is just a small temporary setback. We'll be back at it before you know it." I responded, "I hope you're right, Bill. I just feel so stupid that I ever said anything to John Roth about where our location was and about the evidence that we were collecting. I never figured that they would commandeer our research area." Shortly thereafter, fall arrived. As typical in southern Oregon, it was another Indian summer. The temperatures were still incredibly warm. As the sign says, which is hanging over 6th Avenue in downtown Grants Pass, Oregon, it's the climate. Matter of fact, within a 5-year period of time, Grants Pass had made the cover of 3 different magazines as the #1 place in America to retire due to the climate, small population, low cost of living, and growing medical services for the elderly retirement population. Grants Pass rivals Mayberry RFD. Well, it turned out that Dr. York was right. He told me that another opportunity would arise, and he was correct. A deer hunter named John had given me a call at my private practice office and reported a Bigfoot sighting to me. Dr. York and I met with him for breakfast the following Saturday morning. It turns out that John was retired from the Marines and was working for a logging company in the local area. He shared with us about how he was up in the mountains about 10 miles away from the Oregon Caves National Monument Park, and he had just dropped a deer. John began to walk toward the carcass to retrieve it when he heard a loud stomp on the ground coming from behind him. He immediately spun around and quickly surveyed his surrounding environment like a well-trained Marine. He couldn't see what had made the loud noise behind him. He continued to survey the logging road and surrounding brush and trees when he heard the loud stomp once again. This time he had acquired a better sense for where the noise was coming from and turned his head to the right to look up the mountainside. That's when he saw a Bigfoot standing up on the hill about a third of the way up the slope. He stomped the ground a third time. John shared that he wasn't completely caught off guard by what he was looking at because he had grown up in southern Oregon and he had heard several stories about Bigfoot. He had also read about my family's encounter at the Oregon Caves National Monument Park and saw the TV interviews. He told me, "I knew you weren't lying when I saw you on TV, and your body was shaking and those tears were coming down your face." John reported to Dr. York and me that he had just stood there on the logging road in amazement and held his ground. I asked him, "Weren't you scared, John?" He said, "Nah, I wasn't going to run off like one of them Army or Air Force boys would have. By God, I'm a Marine. We are the first to fight and the last to leave." Then he laughed and said, "Leave no deer behind. I shot the damn thing, and I wasn't going to give it up to some Bigfoot no matter how big he was." All 3 of us laughed. What John described next stunned both Dr. York and me. Apparently, the Bigfoot stomped the ground a 4th, 5th, and 6th time while he was motioning with his right hand and arm for John to leave the area. John refused to budge, nor was he willing to give up his deer. After the 2-minute standoff proved to be fruitless for the Bigfoot, he turned around and started to walk up the mountainside. John immediately took 3 steps in the direction of the ascending Bigfoot. Not a good idea. The Bigfoot immediately turned around and took 3 large steps down the mountainside toward John, stopped and stomped on the ground several times while whacking the ground with a big branch. Then he growled and screamed at John. He raised his hunting rifle at Bigfoot and yelled, "I'll shoot you, you son of a bitch, if you take one more step towards me." The Bigfoot sighed out of frustration, turned around, and started walking up the mountainside again and on into the tree line. John lowered his rifle, walked back toward the carcass, collected his deer, placed it in the back of his truck, and drove away. Even with all of his 40 years of big game hunting in Africa, Dr. York couldn't come up with a story that was equivalent to the one we just heard John share with us. We both sat there with our jaws dropped while John continued to munch down his breakfast. We gave each other the look, nodded our heads in agreement, and then Dr. York asked, "John, would you be willing to drive us up to the area where this fantastical story took place?" John said, "Sure, when would you like to go?" Bill and I both said at the same time, "Now?" John responded as he ate his last bite of breakfast. "Okay, I have some time to spare this morning. Let's go." We pushed away from the table, paid our bill, utilized the bathrooms, and departed for the mountains. Although John lived in the Cave Junction area, he was gracious enough to drive into Grants Pass to meet with us for breakfast. However, it also meant that Bill and I were going to have to follow him back out to the Oregon caves in order to go investigate the area of his alleged encounter. While we were following John in his Ford pickup truck, I said to Bill, "You know, he could be lying to us, right? I've already had some other people attempt to hoax me, so I would turn the media onto them so they would get some TV time." Dr. York responded, "If you'll recall, when you brought up the possibility of turning the media onto him so he could tell his story, he respectfully declined your offer. I don't think he's lying to us. If he is, we still had a wonderful breakfast and an opportunity to spend some time in the mountains." I responded, "All good points, Bill. You're right. It's been a great morning so far, and I love being up in the mountains." After driving several miles up into the mountains, we finally reached the spot where John claimed his encounter took place. We got out of our vehicles and John began to tell us his story all over again, this time with the benefit of seeing the surroundings as his very consistent story unfolded again. We walked over to the location where he had shot the deer, and there was plenty of blood on the ground. As we stood on the logging road, he pointed up the mountainside and told us approximately where the Bigfoot was standing and stomping on the ground. We proceeded to hike up the mountainside to the very spot that he was pointing out from below. Sure enough, there were several very large footprints on the ground. Some were deeper than others, most likely due to the stomping. We could see where the Bigfoot had turned around and started walking back up the mountainside. When Dr. York and I were done exploring the area, Bill asked John, "Would you mind if we turn this into a research area? We just lost our previous research area and we're looking for another one. However, we don't want to take over your hunting area." John responded, "Oh, hell, that's not a problem. I have several hunting areas and the others don't have a 10-foot tall Bigfoot trying to intimidate me. I'll just hunt in those areas and you two crazy fools poke around in these woods all you want." All 3 of us laughed. Dr. York and I thanked John for his time and for his willingness to share his story with us. We followed him back down the logging road for several miles and off the mountain back down into rural civilization. He turned left and we turned right. While turning in opposite directions, everyone waved to one another and then we never saw John ever again. What a character he was. I'll never forget his forthrightness, bravery, and friendly nature. A true Marine. Dr. York and I were able to make a couple more trips into the area before the snow hit in early November. We found many fresh tracks as well as 2 bedding areas, which indicated that we were most definitely dealing with a family group that consisted of an adult male, adult female, and an adolescent child. The 2 bedding areas were exactly the same. The adult male slept on the left side and left an impression that was about 9 feet long and 4 feet wide. The adult female always slept on the right side and left an impression that was about 7.5 feet long and about 3 feet wide. Finally, the adolescent always slept in the middle and left behind an impression that was about 6 feet long and almost 3 feet wide, too. Our last visit to the area in the fall of 2000 was just after a very light snowfall hit. Bill and I were still able to make it up the logging road and to our research area. We hiked up the mountainside, found some fresh tracks, and followed them up the mountainside and into the tree line. The tracks went over to a place where a very large stump in the ground had been located. We observed the surrounding area, and it became very clear to the both of us what we were seeing. The Bigfoot had wrapped his arms around the rotting stump, ripped it out of the ground, and threw it off to the side. Then he began to dig through the ground to eat the grubs. After he had finished his work in this spot, we could tell by the tracks on the ground that he turned and walked over to where the stump had landed and started digging at the bottom of the stump for more grubs. After he had finished his meal, based on the tracks in the snow, he had turned and walked away along the ridgeline. I said to Dr. York, "Can you imagine the strength that it took to uproot that stump and toss it 15 feet away?" He smiled as he shook his head and responded, "It would take a great deal of strength to do what has obviously been done here. I'm beginning to think that based on the estimated size, visuals by witnesses, and the foot tracks in the ground, that these creatures are much stronger than the gorillas that I was dealing with in Africa. They're an amazing animal." Bill and I carefully walked back down the snowy mountainside, climbed back into my Suburban, and warmed up as we drove down the logging road and back to Grants Pass, Oregon. We understood that was going to be our last trip to the research area until the spring of 2001. However, it wasn't like we weren't going to see each other ever again, because our offices were located right next to each other in the business office complex located near the Rogue River in Grants Pass, Oregon. During the rest of the winter, Bill and I saw each other several times per week. Sometimes we would simply make our way over to one another's office during downtime. On other occasions, we would meet up at the Hellgate Cafe for lunch. We would talk about Bigfoot, our families, Bigfoot, our businesses, Bigfoot, local community affairs, and Bigfoot. We also took the time to develop a game plan to assemble a research team that would help us gather as much evidence as possible for the following spring, summer, and fall of 2001. When the spring of 2001 arrived, we implemented our come one, come all strategy in order to obtain as many boots on the ground as possible. We needed as much help as we could muster up in order to help us collect evidence of the Bigfoot family in the area. I put the word out via friends and the internet. As a result, we had men, women, adolescents, children, and the elderly all participating in our monthly outings, sometimes twice-a-month outings. We even had some people who were gracious enough to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner for only $50 a person. Their sole contribution to the weekend outings was to make sure that everyone else was well fed Friday evening through Sunday morning. They just wanted to sit around the campfire with everyone else and listen to the stories and see the evidence that we brought back to camp. For instance, foot casts, scat samples, hair samples, pictures, etc. We all ate like kings and queens. The campfire stories were my favorite thing about spending time up in the mountains. Quite often, everyone would look to Dr. York to tell us all about his adventures while being a big game hunter and guide. He talked about the elephants, giraffes, gorillas, and lions. He shared with us about how he led an African safari for the Queen of England. He talked about the gun battles with African poachers as well as his time fighting in the Korean War. Apparently, he still had a bullet in his body that they could not remove without risking paralyzing him. His stories and his British accent were captivating to everyone. Other group members also had fascinating and entertaining stories to tell around the campfire at night. Doug Thomas would share with all of us about his adventures up in the surrounding mountains and logging roads with all of his friends. He certainly had more than his fair share of Bigfoot stories that he had heard about from others who lived in southern Oregon. He would tell these stories to everyone and captivate his audience. Some of them were very scary and others were ended with a punchline that got everyone laughing. It was very cool for me to have a fellow Christian involved with the Bigfoot research. The fact that he was a pastor and principal at Vineyard Christian School was icing on the cake. Some of my favorite stories from this particular research area include the following. Number 1. We probably had a group of people on one weekend that totaled close to 40 souls. Although most of them were men, we also had some women and children along. As per my request, most everyone brought along walkie-talkies, and we turned all of them to the same channel. Our base camp was located at the intersection of 3 logging roads. When darkness arrived, we spread out an equal number of people down all 3 logging roads. They were instructed to pair up in twos, keep their flashlights off, maintain a distance of 50 feet between parties, and quietly radio the base camp if they saw or heard anything. Approximately 2 hours later, the 2 gentlemen who were stationed down one of the logging roads at the farthest point away from base camp came running back to camp, both screaming and crying. Needless to say, everyone else came running back to the base camp too. Once I was able to calm the 2 men down, we learned that they had been sitting on the side of the logging road in the pitch dark behind a bush. Suddenly they saw the silhouette of a tall, upright, bipedal walking creature coming down the logging road in their direction. They were very scared, and instead of following protocol, they decided to light up the creature in order to stop it in its tracks before it came any closer to them. Well, they apparently succeeded. The Bigfoot stopped in its tracks, turned around, and ran back down the logging road in the direction it just came from. Then it took a right and ran up the side of the mountain. Although not everyone was willing to come along with Dr. York and me, I managed to get 20 guys who had enough courage to follow. We ran up the logging road to the area where they had spotted it, take a right and run up the mountainside. Sure enough, there were 2 huge human-looking tracks on the side of the hill close to the road where it had run up from the logging road and into the brush and trees. Someone brought along a pair of headphones and a parabolic microphone dish. We took turns listening to the Bigfoot pacing back and forth up in the trees and the brush while mumbling to himself. I quickly put together a game plan and gathered the guys around me to tell them what we were going to do next. I told them that I wanted them to spread out along the logging road in both directions, with a distance of 50 feet between each individual. That way, we could cover a lot of ground and get another sighting if he decided to come down to the logging road again. There was absolute silence for about 30 seconds. Then one of the men spoke up. 50 feet apart alone? No way. How about 2 of us together spaced out 50 feet apart from the next couple of men? All the other guys were nodding their heads in agreement. I wasn't going to argue with these volunteers about how their game plan just chopped in half the amount of distance that we could cover along the logging road. I could clearly see that they were all terrified. To get them to spread out in groups of 2 was a significant accomplishment, so I took what I could get. After an hour without any success, we all headed back to the base camp and told the story to everyone else sitting around the campfire. 2. Another favorite story from this research area involved a much smaller group of men. One of our volunteer researchers was an electronics specialist from Eugene, Oregon. His name is Don Moser. He brought along a seismic sensor, and we positioned it alongside the logging road a couple hundred yards away from the base camp. The setting was placed in a position that would take something very heavy to set it off. That would prevent something as small as a squirrel or deer from triggering the device. Just before dark, we placed one bunch of bananas on the road next to a cantaloupe that we cut in half. In other words, there were 3 large items that would have to be picked up and taken away. The alarm was turned on inside of Don's vehicle, and we sat around the campfire sipping on hot coffee and listening to one another's stories. Suddenly, the alarm went off in the car. Beep, 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 beep. Beep, 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 beep. Beep, 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 beep. I grabbed my million-candle flashlight and aimed it down the logging road and turned it on. You need to understand that my million-candle flashlight could light up the entire mountainside. I turned it on within a matter of seconds. When the million-candle flashlight was turned on, we saw absolutely nothing. There wasn't anything waiting for us. No bear, no deer, elk, cougar, or Bigfoot. Then someone noticed that all of the food was gone too. We walked to the area and couldn't believe our eyes. Whatever it was that was heavy enough to trigger the seismic sensor was also able to grab one bunch of 6 bananas and 2 cantaloupe halves and take them off the road in less than the 3 seconds it took me to light up the area after the alarm started sounding off in Don's car. Whatever managed to pull that off had to be heavy enough to trigger the device, have hands to scoop up the food, and manage to get off the road before the light came on. No animal that only had its mouth to use could have pulled off such a task. Simply not possible. Hands and speed were needed to grab the food and avoid being tagged by the flashlight. Although we were bewildered, we were also excited. We walked back to our base camp, grabbed our next round of food for the bait pile, headed back to the seismic sensor, and put everything in its place. Don Moser tinkered around with the seismic sensor to make sure that the setting was correct and that it was still functioning. Then we went back to our base camp and waited for the alarm to go off again. This time I placed my camp chair away from the campfire so I could turn on my million-candle flashlight within 1 or 2 seconds of the alarm going off. There were 2 other guys sitting right next to me. The rest of the guys were staying warm around the fire and enjoying Dr. York's stories. About an hour later, beep, 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 beep. I immediately turned on my flashlight within 1 to 2 seconds, tops. I was going to light up that Bigfoot whether he wanted to be lit up or not. Dang! There was absolutely nothing there again. No animal to speak of, and the food was all gone. How in the world were they able to pull that off 2 times in a row? We walked down the logging road and examined the area. The summer temperatures were constantly in the 80s and 90s, so the road was baked as hard as cement, so we couldn't find any foot tracks. All of the food was gone. The device was still working. We walked back to the base camp totally stumped. We knew that it had to be a Bigfoot that was pulling off the heist of our food in the bait pile. It had to be really heavy to set off the device, and it had to have hands to scoop up all 3 food products and get off the road within 1 to 2 seconds. We were befuddled yet amazed. There was so much more to learn about these incredible animals. 1 hour later, as we were wrapping things up around the campfire and were talking about climbing into our sleeping bags inside of our tents, we suddenly heard beep, 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 beep. I ran for my flashlight and lit up the road. In the midst of the excitement, Don Moser was yelling, "Guys, guys, it's not the seismic sensor. I brought it back to camp and the alarm is turned off inside my vehicle." Then we heard it again. Beep, 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 beep. Beep, 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 beep. Beep, 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 beep. The noise sounded exactly like Don Moser's alarm. However, we finally realized that the noise was coming from the brush and trees on the edge of our base camp and not from Don's car. Wow! No freaking way! The Bigfoot was imitating the sound of the electronic alarm and was messing with us just for fun. Well, one of our guys on the research team got a little angry and excited and decided that he was going to walk right into the brush and trees and let the Bigfoot know what he was thinking and feeling. I had to grab him by the shoulder and pull him back. I told him, "You're not going to put yourself in danger under my watch. You're also not going to put me in the position of having to explain to your wife and children what happened to you while you were up here." He stood down, and we stood back away from the perimeter of the camp. 3. On another occasion, we had just finished up a weekend of Bigfooting in this research area. Once again, several foot casts were collected in the area. I gave all of my foot casts away to the visitors and kids and waved goodbye to them. Then Don Moser and I commenced with Operation Lollygagging. After everyone left, we started to set up a video camera hidden under a fake rock with a waterproof container nearby, which contained the battery and other electronics. We decided to give this a try because previously we had noticed that the Bigfoot always seemed to walk around the base camp area after our departures. That's based on foot tracks found in the area upon our return to camp. Don Moser was up on the hill overlooking the base camp. I was standing on the logging road in base camp, acting as his potential Bigfoot, so he could make sure that he was visually covering the entire area. As he was taking care of things and setting up the equipment, we both heard a very loud growl come from behind him. He stopped doing what he was doing, and his eyes got as big as saucers. I'm sure mine did too. However, I immediately told Don that I didn't see anything behind him and that he was okay. I backed away from him to see if I could get a better view of what it was that was behind him and growling so loudly. Still, I could see nothing. Then suddenly something standing right behind me growled and was breathing down the back of my neck. I seriously thought I was a dead man at that moment in time. I slowly turned around, prepared to meet my fate, when I saw absolutely nothing. I stuck out my hand and felt a hairy chest right in front of me. I took 5 steps back very quickly and turned around and walked back over to where Don was. I said, "Don, I just had one over there growl at me too. I think they want us to go now." He said, "I'm done setting everything up, so yes, let's go. This is getting weird." I retorted, "You're telling me?" We left in a hurry. 4. Finally, my most favorite story from this research area occurred when a writer and photographer for USA Today came with me in the middle of October 2002. It was just the 3 of us alone without anyone else. The gentleman's name was Marco R. Della Cava. He was a city boy from the San Francisco Bay Area and was not a big fan of camping in the outdoors. Neither was his photographer. Although it was winter and the sun set early in the evening, we managed to arrive and set up camp before it became dark. We drove about a mile down the logging road and put out some food for the bait pile up on the mountainside where John had shot the deer and was confronted by the adult male Bigfoot. We sat down at the bottom of the mountainside and waited in the dark for something to come and hit the bait pile. Nothing ever did. However, we did hear a lot of heavy-footed movement up in the tree line at the top of the mountain. Something up there was not comfortable with us hanging around at the bottom of the hill. We drove a mile back to base camp, warmed up around the campfire, and then got ready to go to bed. The photographer refused to sleep inside the pup tent. He insisted on sleeping inside the car. I asked him, "So, you don't think that Bigfoot is capable of smashing through a window if he really wanted to get to you?" He said, "At least I'll see him coming. I can't see him coming if I'm inside the tent." On the other hand, Marco stated, "I don't want to see him coming, so I want to sleep in the tent. Let's get in there before I start freaking out." We climbed into the tent and got inside our sleeping bags. I said good night to Marco and began to close my eyes. He asked me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to sleep. It's bedtime." He asked, "How are you going to do that?" I said, "Well, I'm going to close my eyes just like this and fall asleep. Watch me." I quickly faded away into dreamland. The next morning, I woke up, opened my eyes. Marco was laying on the other side of the tent, just looking at me with his eyes wide open. I asked him, "Didn't you get any sleep?" He responded, "No, how could you sleep?" I said, "I was tired. That's what people do when it's nighttime. Why didn't you sleep?" He said, "I couldn't sleep because something or someone was walking all around the camp last night. He even stood by my side of the tent for an hour just breathing really loud. I tried to wake you up, but you were sound asleep." I responded, "Welcome to my world, Marco," and laughed. We crawled out of the tent, and I heated up some water so I could make some coffee for the three of us. I was apologizing up one side and down the other because they hadn't seen a Bigfoot, didn't get any pictures of a Bigfoot, nor saw any tracks left behind by a Bigfoot. 15 minutes later, as we were sipping on our hot coffee during the cold morning hours, we all heard a noise coming from the area down the logging road where we left the food for the bait pile the night before. Marco summed it up best near the end of his front page USA Today article, which was published on October 31st, 2002. He concluded his article by writing the following: "And just as the coffee is brewing, it happens. From up a winding fire road come sounds, the high-pitched chatter of a chimp suddenly intercut by the low groan of a scream in slow motion. Ears prick up. Breathing becomes optional. For 15 seconds, this unearthly racket floods the camp. Then it vanishes. Other than humans, most animals known to man are incapable of such broad sound ranges. Bigfoot or not, something odd has spoken." Not a bear, not a cougar," says Dr. Johnson. "You ever hear anything like that before?" Dr. Johnson's visitor, suddenly busy taking down the tent, offers to discuss his myriad theories in town. The tall man, in search of an even taller thing, smiles and pops open the caddy's trunk. "You have to admit," he says, "this sure beats golfing." Well, what Marco didn't include in his front page USA Today article was the fact that I responded to the scream by saying, "Let's go." He said, "Yes, let's go. I want to leave immediately." I said, "Nope. You guys came up here to write about a Bigfoot encounter. We're not leaving here until we go check out the bait pile first." Marco replied, "I don't want to go anywhere near the bait pile." I said, "Okay, you guys wait here. However, for the record, I have the gun and the car. If I don't make it back, start walking down the mountain on that road right over there." Marco replied, "We're coming with you." We climbed inside my car and drove the mile toward the bait pile area. We got out of the car and checked out the bait pile. All of the food was gone. There were Bigfoot tracks in the area, and something heavy-footed was moving around inside the tree line at the top of the mountainside. I asked, "Are you convinced now?" Marco said, Yes, I'm convinced. Can we please leave now?" We climbed back into my car, left the mountain, and drove to Herb's Restaurant in Grants Pass, Oregon, a nice and toasty restaurant that serves great food and an awesome breakfast. We took some time to process everything, and then they left from there. Apparently, Marco forgot to include the above in his article, including the pictures of the footprints. I think the city slicker was coming to spend time with me in order to mock me for a front-page Halloween article, and instead left the mountain a believer. Good for him. On the other hand, my Bigfoot adventures were about to take a sour and sad turn for the worse. That's the end of Chapter 7, A Bigfoot, a 50-year journey come full circle, written by Dr. Matthew A. Johnson. Chapter 8, just ahead. It's called My Broken Heart. I'm Willi Rose.